I think you can kind of get stuck with kind of trying to build processes to manage all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if people aren't invested in those processes in the same way that you are and kind of understand the end goals of them and willing to contribute time, because like it's one thing to put a process in place, but if you don't kind of see it through and people aren't aligned around it, it doesn't matter how good the process is, like it just won't be engaged with enough to really bear it out and see it come to fruition.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Jair McBain. Jair is currently a game producer at Land & Sea Games, creators of Alto's Adventure, producer at Fun Selector Labs, and also director of Loon Interactive, a small team making assets and tools for game makers. Today, we're going to talk about working remotely, mental health and crunch culture, production best practices, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 3 of season 3 of the Zero to Play podcast. All right, welcome Jay to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. What a polished intro. Beautiful.
Cheers, I appreciate it. All right, so I want to jump straight into it with a really interesting question. You did a talk at Play by Play several years ago, and you mentioned this thing during your talk about how while you were working through crunch, you grinded your teeth, and that led to some like issues. And I want to talk to you about this because I am currently not working through crunch, but we're working towards a deadline at my work on Icarus at the moment at Rockerworks. And I woke up this morning with really sore teeth, and I kid you not, because I've been thinking about it ever since you mentioned it. And I feel like since I heard you say that, I've been consciously now like tensing my jaws in the middle of the night. And I'd love to know what that experience was like what that experience was like for you and what you kind of learned through that process.
Yeah, I think that specific kind of example of crunching your teeth is something that comes generally pretty late in the process of working through burnout and having, a high stress environment around you and your body kind of settling into that. For me, it was probably 2 years into that process of like being in a high stress state that I noticed those symptoms. And it's, it's not uncommon. It's something a lot of people experience when they're having anxiety troubles or are high stress. Practicing like meditation, being conscious of the way you hold your body when you're working. Like at that time, I would tense up. I'd have my shoulders tight. I'd kind of hunch over. I might not necessarily work at a desk that had a great ergonomic setup, and kind of fixing all those things, as well as just doing things that lower your stress generally, like regular exercise and practicing like mindfulness and meditation, as I mentioned before. All those things kind of contribute to creating this like background level of I guess like internal relaxation and kind of like a base level kind of peace that sits underneath the way you carry yourself at work. So I think there's a lot of things you can do, but kind of fixing that baseline and kind of getting the rest of your life right, so that when you come into the work environment, you're not automatically tensing up. That for me at least solved most of those problems. It's kind of hypocritical for me to say that those are the ways to solve it and it fixes everything and you're good to go after that. It's a constant journey of like upkeep. I still struggle with those problems all the time, and I'm just now more aware of when they're happening and what I can do to kind of help myself get through those periods and change my behavior so it doesn't get away from me as much as it used to. But yeah, I think if you're getting to that point, it's probably been something you've been dealing with for a while and should really like reflect on what's causing that reaction. Maybe it's just like, for me at least, my baseline kind of way I carry myself is kind of high anxiety, high tension, because I want to do everything well. I want to make people happy. And maybe it's not the actual environment you're in terms of the work. Maybe your studio isn't crunching. Maybe your boss is lovely and supportive. But as long as like you carry yourself in a certain way, you can find it that you can cause that stress and tension in yourself, no matter the situation, which is definitely true for me. So if you look at it and it's not your environment, then look at just your behavior. And I would say like that's kind of the key to unlocking why you're doing it and how to solve it. Some people need professional help to do that. Maybe it's a dentist who can give you some sort of mouth guard, or maybe it's a psychologist to help you work through the struggles you're having. Yeah, I think that is an indication that things have probably gone a little further than they should have. Anyway, yeah.
No, it's cool. I think those are great pieces of advice, and I like talking about mental health. It's something, and just burnout in general. It's something I want to talk about more on this podcast, and it was really cool to hear you talk about that so openly. So that's really cool. For me personally, I love ending the workday at 5:30, and then going home, and then just spending time with my wife and two dogs, and not talking about anything games related, watching something on Netflix or cooking, or just relaxing and catching up, and not thinking about work, not checking my phone. Especially now, I have a few commitments on social media for like the NZGDA and things like that, and it's so easy for me to be pulled into that. I do fall, victim to it. I do pick up my phone several times, where I try now just plug my phone in as soon as I get home on charge, and then not touch it until I am setting my alarm for the next day. And that helps me not like burn out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It sounds like you do a lot of the same things that I do. Like, cooking is a big one, because I think if you put your phone away and you've got a paper recipe in front of you, and all you're doing is like being completely engaged in that process, and then at the end you have this, hopefully if you've done it right, a really, really nice experience where you get to kind of taste the hard work you put into something, and it keeps you present like that during the process of making it. That's a really good one. And it's kind of something you have to do every day. I think routine is really important as well. Something you mentioned about devices and kind of putting them away and keeping them out of sight outside of work hours. That is absolutely the most critical part to maintaining my mental health. I find, like, I've always been a no notification person. Like, no app can notify me about anything on my phone ever, even messaging apps. Like, I don't want to know about it. I'll look at it when I want to, periodically, and that is definitely the best way for me to be. And I, weekends now, I don't touch a computer. I try not to play games more than 1 or 2 hours. I go hike, go running, just anything that I can do not to be engaged with the screen, because ultimately, like, if you're working even just 8 hours a day on a computer, I think eventually, after a certain period of time, your eyes are going to start struggling. Your posture is going to be a problem. Being idle for that long is just not healthy. None of this is revolutionary stuff, but yeah, I think it's really important. And I wish maybe it was talked about more in games, and it was encouraged more that people spent time away from the screen, especially like throughout the creative process. I don't think we always need to be on a device to be contributing meaningfully towards the game development process. Some of the best times are when you sit around a table with 10 people and talk about a game mechanic, and kind of problem solve your way in your minds and on paper, and then kind of that's the most rewarding and almost the most productive part of the game development process, I think, when you can just be away from the screen sometimes, and then when you come back to the screen, you're reinvigorated and you've got a strong idea of what you're going to do, and you just get to doing it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I could talk about this for several hours, but I think it's a nice segue into talking about like nature and getting yourself off the screen. Alto's Adventure and Alto's Odyssey and Land and Sea games. I have a lot of questions about this. Alto's Adventure was the first game I purchased on iPhone, and spent money on in the App Store. So that game has a very important kind of part in my kind of mobile gaming journey, and I loved the game. I thought it was beautiful, just how simple it was. What's been your journey with Land and Sea Games and becoming a producer for their team? Because it's an interesting thing, actually. Like, how, if you could talk on just the journey of Alto's Adventure, and how that's kind of passed hands over the last few years, because I find it hard online to try and understand the journey that game and IP has gone on. But yeah, if you could talk to me about that, and then your experience joining Land and Sea Games.
Sure. Yeah, it is a confusing one to unravel, and I think announcing the studio Land and Sea as a kind of entity, which hadn't really existed by name before, is part of trying to solve that problem. So Harry Nesbitt, who is the original creator of Alto's adventure.
Mm-hmm.
He was essentially approached by a studio in Canada called Snowman, I think way back in 2013, maybe even end of 2012, to uh, he was an illustrator at the time. He was doing a lot of art that reflected the themes he talked about, nature, kind of this like really warm and inviting environment that you kind of want to climb into
Mm-hmm.
when you see it. So he caught the eye of these two guys, Ryan and Jordan, who were running a studio called Snowman that were working on productivity apps of all things, but were really
Mm-hmm.
passionate about snowboarding. So at first, Harry came on to do the art and design for this game that they kind of had in their minds, a really high level concept of what a downhill kind of snowboarding game might look like in an endless sense. And over time, over the first few months, Harry kind of was doing art, then he was doing design, and then he realized that it would work best if he also learned programming and built the game himself. And essentially, Harry did all of the creative and
Wow.
development process of Alto's adventure. And the themes that you mentioned, nature and kind of peace and like what I call it, like almost a systemic kind of meditation, where like the game requires a certain amount of focus from you, but not too much, and you can kind of just settle into the rhythm of it. All of that stuff is things that he's interested in from his life before games. He also, like me, enjoys hiking and camping and being out in nature, watching the weather roll over you, which is a very strong theme in the game. So I think all those kind of inspirations and passions of his made it into that game and kind of resonated with a lot of people. So yeah, so Snowman basically helped publish and do the business side of the Alto series, and Land and Sea, which initially started as just Harry, grew into a team of a few people for Alto's Odyssey, and then now since Alto's Odyssey has kind of rebranded as Land and Sea and grown into a number of additional people, and we kind of see the future of Alto through in that way. And in terms of how I came to Land and Sea, well, like you, I think Alto's Adventure is one of the kind of standout games for me in the early iPhone days. And it made a big impact on me when I first played it. I identified with all those themes and really appreciated the art. And at the time, I was working as an illustrator and an artist as well. So I kind of came at it from that angle. And then over the years, Harry and I began chatting, and just informally here and there, we found out we were into some of the same things. Both really big fans of Lord of the Rings and hiking and kind of spending time in your own head out in nature and all of that. And when I moved to the UK, we hung out a couple of times and kind of kicked off a bit of a friendship there. And then a few years went by. I lived in New Zealand for 2 years by that point, and I just dropped him a message one day saying, "Hey, I'm moving back to the UK. I'm thinking of changing jobs. Do you know of anything going?" He was like, "Actually, yes, we need a producer, so let's chat." And that wasn't the beginning of our working relationship necessarily. We kind of did some test collaborations to make sure everything would be a good fit. But in the meantime, while I'm working remotely from New Zealand, things would be functional and I could service the role as I needed to. But yeah, since then it's been about a year and a couple of months, and it's been working great. And I feel really passionate about the Alto series and being a part of helping see that into the future. We just announced Alto's Odyssey: The Lost City, which is a Apple Arcade special edition of the 2018 Alto's Odyssey. So being a part of that has been really exciting, and it's a great way to kind of got into the series. So I had a really good reference point with Alto's Odyssey, and then to kind of just add new content to that and build on the foundations was really nice. Rather than diving in and trying to problem solve a new title from day one, we've kind of had this gentle ease in, and I got to see how that game was built, how Harry works on it, bring some other people into that process with him, and it's been really rewarding.
Cool. Wow, that's such an amazing story. And what a few things that I love is, one, you were inspired by this title, and that led to you reaching out and building a relationship with Harry. And I think that that's really cool to see, just that initiative. And I think something that a lot of people would like to hear, that if you are really passionate about a game, that it is possible to just find out the developers and reach out and start a conversation, and you might share a lot of the same passions, and that is really important when it comes to hiring. And I think that's really cool.
For sure. I just want to say that like people often ask, how do you get into games or how do you find your way into the role that you want to be in? And, I worked in games for nearly 10 years now, and I had a lot of experience in production and then also design and QA before that. And then before that was illustration and graphic design. So it's not like, you can just make a connection and then that's it. You kind of got the job. It's very much like you kind of do the groundwork, you build your skills, and at the same time you network and you network genuinely. I think a lot of people network for the sake of building the connection or hoping for some outcome, and I think that's the worst way to do it, and it comes across very disingenuous, and people feel that. I think it's something a lot of early career devs struggle with, trying to find a balance around. For me, when I was living in Australia, for example, I would just go to the IGDA meetups every month, and then from there I'd make some friends. And what I would try and do is at least one night every week for the first few years of my career, get dinner with someone from the industry, and genuinely just try and understand them, get to know them, be their friend, support their games, help them test their titles, or with a particular like business development problem, or suggest some people that they could bring on board to help them with their project and be genuinely useful. So now I feel like I'm in a position where I have all these great people around me where, if one day, I needed a hand with some testing, I know, there's this person in Australia or this person in New Zealand who I can lean on to say, hey, you know more about this problem that I'm trying to solve than I do. You want to help out, and they'll genuinely, care about doing that, and then I'm in a position to maybe help them again in the future. So I think, yeah, it's just about being genuine and forming real connections with people, and treating people with kind of the respect and kind of understanding that you would expect to have from anyone else.
Totally. Yeah, the power of community I think is really, really strong. And yeah, just being human, being self-aware of like what your interests are, and going out and just meeting other people is definitely, even if you're introverted. I'm introverted. I am definitely introverted. I get exhausted after social experiences, but I love networking because I love meeting other like-minded people. And even though I like networking, I still can't do too much of it at once, and it does become really exhausting, and something that I do in bursts. But it is a really interesting thing where I had this realization after really just leaning into my passion for games and the future of games and business, and that's what led to this podcast. Is just I love meeting other people. Even though it exhausts me, it is very fulfilling, and to just know, just to learn and grow myself as a developer, and just to understand the journey that other people are on. I can't remember how you came into my view through Twitter, but when I saw that there was a producer working on the Alto series living in New Zealand, I was completely taken aback, because in my mind I was like, that could be me one day. Just seeing that that's possible in New Zealand, I thought that was really inspiring. And one thing I want to talk to you about is what I've called doing the remote night shift role, because you work remotely, which a lot of developers in New Zealand might be doing, and it might be a growing thing, as working for remote studios and remote companies. But you work a night, or you did for a big portion of the last year, as you worked a night shift so that you're on the UK time zone. And I think that's a problem that a lot of New Zealanders might face. So I'd love it if you could talk a bit more about how that process has been, working that night shift, for your work-life balance, your mental health, and what advice you have for people that are working that night shift, and where you are now, and what you've kind of learned throughout the last year.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, before I get into it, I kind of want to stress that it's definitely been my choice to do that. It's not been a requirement of my job at all. I think as a studio, Lemon Seed's kind of core tenets are very much based around being able to do your best work when you're healthiest and most relaxed, and have kind of had the best rest you possibly can. For me, it was very much about the intention was to actually move to the UK as soon as I got the job, which happened to be March of 2020, which, as everyone knows now, was when lockdown first kicked in. And so essentially, it wasn't a choice to kind of stay here. It was definitely a necessity. But Yeah, so the reason I'd done the night work for that year basically was to just make sure I get to know the team as best as I possibly can, which means we needed overlap to talk about the challenges we're having, especially in such a critical period of time where we were announcing the studio, we were pitching a new game internally, we were starting work on a new Alto's title where I needed to kind of understand what the development team's up to. So that was kind of the motivation behind it. And I don't regret that by any means. I think it was the right choice. But I think after some time, maybe 8 months of doing that every night, working from 8 p.m. till 4 a.m., you kind of need to like listen to your body and listen to like the natural rhythms that kind of in terms of productivity and kind of when you can do your best work and start kind of pivoting your time around those. So over the last couple of months, I tried kind of splitting my day, some in the morning here, because we have snowman in Canada, that actually times up with them well. And then in the evening, coming back for a couple of hours to match up with my team and make sure, you know, we can have the conversations we need to have. Yeah, I think working nights is actually good for me. I usually kind of tend towards being most productive in the evening, especially around like 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. like that, a bit of a night owl. So I can get deep focus there. No one else is working. There's no noise outside. Nothing else is really going on usually. So I'm not distracted. So that works really well for me. So I think even, you know, even if I was in the UK now and I could choose to work full daytime hours, I might even choose to still split my day and work some in the evening because I love getting out for a run in the middle of the day or being able to go grab a coffee in the morning with a friend who works more normal hours at their kind of morning break time. Yeah, I think in terms of like other people doing it from New Zealand and working remotely, I would say try and strike a balance from the outset. If it, you know, if you know that you're not great with working nights and you can't sleep easily during the day, then yeah, be a little more conscious of whether it's healthy for you to do that or not, or you can actually, you know, get those critical hours of sleep you need to get. As long as you're getting some sunlight and you're getting proper sleep and you know your mental health is surviving and your relationships and all the other things that you would normally do, like, you know, going to I don't know, a yoga class or whatever it is you do with your life, like you can still do those things, then I think there's no real harm for, you know, for a period of time to work nights.
Yeah, I think one misconception is when you say night shift, I immediately think for the whole daytime you're asleep. Could you elaborate on like what hours you slept? Just because I
Yeah,
think that will make it a lot clearer with how much time you actually have to do things during the day as well.
yeah. I mean, I would normally go to bed at straight at 4, so I'm pretty good at falling asleep right after I log off. And I would wake up at some days 10:30, some days 11:30. So I'm not sacrificing that much sleep, and usually even at the best of times, I'm sleeping 6.5, 7 hours a night. It's just my natural rhythm suits that. So for me, this is sustainable. There might be people that need to sleep 8.5, 9 hours a night, and I would say then you probably need to really think about what's best for you. But for me, you know, this works well. And I felt really supported by my team, especially Harry, kind of as the company lead and creative director. He is absolutely the biggest proponent for looking after yourself and taking time off when you need to. It's really common that we'll just message each other, you know, with a couple of days notice and say, hey, Wednesday, I'm going to go for a walk in the afternoon because the weather forecast is looking good. And especially with those guys living in Southern England, you have to kind of base your life around the weather. So there's often not much notice, but we're kind of really able to take those opportunities when they come up and support each other to do them.
Yeah. So speaking about the weather in England, have you booked flights to go back? Are you looking at heading back to be there in person?
I would love to be there. Mostly it's just about when we can be vaccinated at this point. And I think, you know, like most countries in Southern Hemisphere, specifically New Zealand and Australia, have kind of dropped the ball on when that's going to happen, but a couple of times. But, you know, at the same time, we're the lowest risk countries at the moment, so it kind of makes sense. So I'm just, you know, trying to be at peace with being here at the moment and enjoy what New Zealand has to offer. And you know, I wouldn't say it's been easy all the time to feel kind of the other end of the world from your team and a lot of your friends, but at the same time, I have great people here and can make the most of it. And that's been really important. I think the biggest lesson for me with COVID is I usually am someone who has a lot of future plans, and I feel very like beholden to them. And I think that can be a pretty negative space to be in if you're so focused on them that you kind of don't appreciate the present. And yeah, that's been something I had to work out a heap over lockdown and over this year. You know, it's and I think it's been a really good lesson, and I don't know that I would have learned that if we hadn't had, you know, COVID and kind of this isolation that we've had. So yeah, in many ways, I'm kind of grateful for it as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a crazy experience for a lot of people here at Rockerworks. We've gone into lockdown 3 times now since like where we've had to kind of just move all the computers. Everyone's had to take their PCs home and set it up, and I feel like it's cool to hear your experience where you know, more or less trapped in New Zealand, having to work remotely, and it's just interesting to hear different people's stories. Hopefully we're at the, you know, end of it once the vaccinations come about, but who knows, this might be a conversation that people talk about a lot, especially if people have liked remote work and that's something that they want to continue to do, you know, without the risk of COVID in the air. That there'll probably be a lot of conversations about mental health and routine and the best work hours. We might see some really interesting trends of people like working night shifts and living, you know, a lot happier lives than they were otherwise. So that's a really interesting part. But I think that's some really cool insight into what your life was like for the last year. But you are also a producer of Fun Selector Labs, and you have this company that develops tools and assets in Unity. I'd love to know a bit more as to, one, how you have time to do those, and what is it that you're actually doing. So as a producer for Fun Selector, for example, what is your main responsibility there? And yeah, what are you currently working on? In today's supporter segment, I'd like to point you towards GameUIDatabase.com. This is the perfect resource for anyone interested in seeing the UI and design of some of the most popular games and interesting indie titles out there. It has an incredible tagging system, and navigating the pages and games couldn't be easier. So if you're researching games for your own project, or you're just curious about how some of today's studios are being creative and unique with their work, check out GameUIDatabase.com. Back to the show.
Well, I think each team is very different, so there's kind of this nice delineation for me and what each requires. Like I mentioned before, my background is in illustration and graphic design. So often I find with Fun Selector, a lot of my work is about preparing a game for release. So we have 2 titles, Art of Rally, which came out September last year on PC, across Steam, Epic, GOG, and is currently in production for release on consoles very soon. Most of my focus was getting the assets together, getting the team together to produce the assets for all of our storefronts, talking to platform holders about what they need to help market our games, locking in opportunities around promotions and kind of press and all of that. And also we put a lot of focus on creating video and kind of like animated content that we can put out with every update and every release. Like we almost treat every update as a whole new release for the game. And we just announced an update called the Polar Color update, which I haven't been personally working on very much. I've been working on other projects, but you can see a trailer that was built for that release specifically. It highlights the vehicles, it highlights the new environments. Yeah, we really put a lot of work into the asset side of the releases. So a lot of my work is there. When I first started with Fun Selector, it was basically a solo creator who'd been working on the game for 4 years already. So it's quite a good framework to come into in terms of like what needed to get done and when. A lot was already locked down. For me, it was about helping him hire a team, which fortunately I was able to hire a lot of people I've worked with before and knew could solve the problems we were trying to solve. And then helping him kind of build the structure to manage that team. Initially, I was very hands-on with that, and now I've backed off with a lot, and I'm doing more kind of. So recently, the project that I've been working on is porting Absolute Drift, which was an early game of Fun Selectors, to Switch last year, and to GOG, which just released last week, and also Epic earlier in the year as well. We did a free week. So most of my time is spent on that project, thinking about what more can we do with it. It's, you know, it's at the end of its life cycle, in kind of the sense that it's been 6 or 7 years since it's been out, and you might not think there's a lot you can do with a game of that age, but we've found that you can still juice a game that's, you know, much older, as long as it's, you know, upkept well, performs well on the new platforms you're porting it to, and can help you highlight the new projects you're working on as well, and just the studio in general. So yeah, that's been my focus.
Nice. Yeah. That's really interesting. So you mentioned kind of building the structure of a new team and then kind of becoming hands off. Can you talk a little bit more? You can keep it as general and broad as you like, but some tips or advice for building out that structure and that framework. Like, what kind of processes did you put in place that helped make a team run well initially?
Sure. My cat's just come to the window, so he might scream a little bit, but we'll see how we go. So I hadn't really planned for this to be the way my career went necessarily, but it turns out that this is the function I tend to serve for studios. I kind of over the last 3 roles I've had have come in at the very start as either the first hire or one of the first or early hires, and help them try and problem solve their way through building a team. And kind of looking at what the project needs, what the studio needs, and being aware of that throughout that process. So for me, it's first about understanding, like, what are the goals? Do we really want to be able to release this game in 7 months on this platform, or does the studio's culture really matter? And in that sense, do we want to grow very consciously and not too fast, or do we just need to hire up to like 40 people and solve a particular development problem right away? So I've been in all those situations. In Australia, I was lucky that one of my first big production jobs was coming in as the first hire and building a team of 40 people in about 12 months.
Wow.
And I think throughout that process, it was about like understanding the product really well, kind of knowing before I hired even anyone what the pre-production process would kind of look like, and have a really strong concept and vision for what the project would be, so that when people are coming in, they know exactly what they're working towards. And then obviously, you know, have to be agile after that point. You can't plan the project and have it go exactly as you hoped from the start necessarily. But if you have a really good reference point to start from, every time someone comes in, they can understand that vision and then help you maintain it and bring other people into it. Because I think after maybe 8 people, one person managing the team can't possibly hope to be keeping everyone on the same page, even with the best production processes. As soon as you're above that kind of level where the communication happens openly and naturally, but usually just because of time constraints, like you can't talk to 8 people for an hour every day because that's your whole day, right? You need to be bringing in people who can help you solve that problem. So usually I like to make sure every team member is interested in helping do that, you know, building processes and maintaining vision. But at a certain point, you need to make sure you're getting key hires in that will understand that intention and have done it before as well, and kind of know the techniques that need to be brought in and the processes that need to be brought in, and help their individual departments manage that process of like onboarding and kind of moving towards a shared vision. I think for me, early days as a producer, with a background in kind of the creative side of games as well, it was very hard for me to hand over kind of big chunks of responsibility. So like art direction, I'm not an art director. I shouldn't be doing art direction. I know that now, but early days, it was very hard for me to hire an art director in and fully hand that over to them without at least having some kind of ties maintained to it. And the way I solved that was, as soon as I recognized that in myself, hiring people who are just so much more competent and better than me that there's no point me contributing. You know, they've absolutely got it handled. Whatever they do is going to be a better result than what I can do. So generally, I just try and make sure I've got everyone around me who is far better than me and far more knowledgeable in their, you know, specialty, their discipline. And it kind of happens naturally. I think you can kind of get stuck with kind of trying to build processes to manage all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if people aren't invested in those processes in the same way that you are, and kind of understand the end goals of them and willing to contribute time. Because like it's one thing to put a process in place, but if you don't kind of see it through and people aren't aligned around it, it doesn't matter how good the process is, like it just won't be engaged with enough to really bear it out and see it come to fruition the way that you hope it would. And then people lose confidence. So it's about people first of all, competence and confidence and all of that in their particular disciplines. And then it's also about kind of stepping away and not micromanaging those people, letting them do what they need to do, taking their feedback and shaping the studio based on what everyone needs it to be, as long as you're keeping kind of the higher level studio goals in mind as well.
Yeah, wow, that's a really really good piece of advice. Just for myself and in my career, just yeah, just realizing that it's the people that need to come first, not the processes. Because yeah, the people at the end of the day are the ones that need to follow the process, and they're the ones that need to be a leader to follow, to lead a team through. And the producers just there to kind of maintain those processes. I'm interested to know for hiring, or what advice do you have for someone that's wanting to, let's say they are skilled as an art director and they want to join onto a new team, or another leadership position. What advice do you have for them during the interview process to kind of, like, what were you looking for? Were you looking for someone with a completely different style that was very committed to it, or were you looking for someone that was really open to kind of changing? Or at the end of the day, does it just it's a person thing? Like, do you have any kind of advice that you realized very quickly after interviewing several people that some stood out a lot more than others?
Yeah, I think, and this goes for every role ever in games or any creative kind of team. I think it's not about it's less about the actual technical ability of the person or experience even, and more about their attitude. Like if you basically in any role, you should just be committed to problem solving above anything else, and making it everyone else's lives around you easier. So I think I'm really naturally drawn to people who, especially in lead roles, who might be open to being persuaded to change their mind about things fairly quickly, or to at least consider alternate perspectives. I think that's a really really great soft skill to have, and I would expect all leaders to have that ability. Sure, sometimes you need to maintain vision, and there's merit in that too, but I think at least hearing people out and making them feel valued, and giving them the opportunity to kind of feed into every aspect of the development process is important. You can't do that in a team of 400. Obviously, you need a bit more structure, but knowing when there's a time for it, and allow it to happen is really important. The other things would just be self-confidence. Like, I think as a leader, you need to know that you can trust in your ability to do the thing that you're helping guide other people to do. I think best art directors can look at a piece of art and pick it up and do a quick paint over and say, I'm not going to fix this for you, but I'm going to give you some ideas for how you might solve these problems. Now you go off and do that and show me it again, and we'll solve this together. I think it's difficult when someone's natural inclination is to take that away and do it themselves because they know they can get the result they want, and then that person doesn't learn anything. So I think that's kind of all these kind of skills are very soft skills. I don't think you can really, you can probably learn them over time, for sure. Like I've definitely become better at not micromanaging or letting go of particular problems that I was having with someone's work, and kind of letting them bring their flavor to the process instead of worrying about it so much. But I think a lot of this stuff just comes from how you carry yourself in your general life. It's not necessarily like a games career specific skill. So yeah, I don't really know what I would say, tell people in terms of how they should develop that, other than just have empathy for other people and care about the work you're doing and care about the way that other people experience you. And Yeah, I don't know how you teach someone that, but
Mm.
I'm sure there's a psychologist or someone out there who can explain the stuff better than I can.
Yeah, no, soft skills are definitely one thing that come about as being more important than the technical skills in a lot of areas, and I do think it is something that's hard to teach, hard to understand, but but um but I think experience just helps. Everyone's on like a self-development journey, like becoming more self-aware as to what gets you stressed out, what gets you burned out, where you're good and bad, and offloading the things that you're bad at and keeping the things that you're good at and communicating that. It's definitely a journey, and I think just having experience, going out there, putting yourself out there, trying things out is the best way to just adjust yourself and get yourself to a position where you feel you're competent and becoming a master in that area.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I just wanted to say quickly that I think there's three key soft skills that people should have. They're the ones that I kind of encourage other people to try and figure out how they should develop in themselves. I think first is communication. It doesn't matter if you're a programmer, an artist, a QA person. I think as programmers can tend to struggle with this a little more because it's a very insular community when you're first learning programming. And I think it's a very solo endeavor in a lot of cases. Um, so I find a lot of programming graduates struggle with communication generally. And I think the best programmers that I've worked with, they may not be the most technical person in the world. They may not be the person that can, write the most incredible, I don't know, network code or whatever. They're the people that can understand how to communicate what they're trying to do and the way it technically works to someone who doesn't have that kind of understanding and problem solving ability in the same way. So
hmm
I think communication in the sense that making sure others understood your message and the intention behind it before you kind of move on and call that conversation done is really important. It's better to be sure that you've communicated now so that later things haven't gone off the rails and you're having to kind of do work that you've created for yourself because you didn't kind of wrap it up nicely initially. The second is patience. It's especially the producer. I think it's most likely that people in your team don't care about the thing that you're trying to implement or improve as much as you do.
definitely
And
relatable.
that's natural. I don't like, why would they? That's your focus. But the thing that you need to do is kind of use patience to explain to them the benefit of implementing a certain process change or changing to a new tool and help them see the value in that. And I think patience goes for everyone in every role in games because of the iterative nature of games.
hmm
If you're not patient throughout that process and seeing the value, or at least trying to understand the value in that kind of repetition and working through the same things multiple times, it's very easy to kind of get frustrated and carry that into your work environment. And then,
hmm
as I mentioned, I think the last one is empathy. If you kind of can't find empathy for the feelings and perspectives of other people, it'll just be very hard for you to understand what their motivations are and to understand how to make them feel the most valued and productive in the work environment. I think ultimately everyone needs to feel that day to day, or at least at a regular kind of cadence. Maybe it's not every day. Maybe you just celebrate an achievement once every sprint or something like that, and the whole team can come around it. As long as people feel valued, then they'll feel happy to come to work and be solving the problems that you're trying to solve together.
Well, that's really really well said. I'm definitely gonna clip that. I think like it's just like the perfect little clip that's just a few minutes long. That because soft skills, you're right, is something that isn't talked about a lot. It's hard to quantify. And I've been kind of searching for something like that that just kind of goes over a few core soft skills and how they're relevant in the workplace. So amazing. Thank you for doing that. We've only got a few minutes left on the podcast, and just because I feel like I've gone through all your different kind of current roles, I do want to ask you a quick question about Loon Interactive and the
Mm,
kind of value you see in this space of developing assets and tools in a game engine, because I do think a lot more developers are going to be working in the space that aren't directly aligned to a project, but they are helping the overall industry become easier and
mm,
provide tools and access to people that would otherwise not. So could you explain to me a bit about the vision behind Loon and what you're working on with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough one. So I think a lot of studios get into the idea of making tools as kind of a side hustle while they're getting started. It seems like it's a quicker way to turn around some revenue than maybe a game release is. But I would question that, and I would encourage people to think about what they really want to be doing. Like, if ultimately you want to be making games, I would say that your time is best spent focusing on that goal specifically. Like, maybe you have a side job while you're working towards that, but tools are a different thing, and I think a lot of people don't understand that it's a very separate set of skills. It's a very different place to come up the problem solving of game systems from. And I would say it's actually just as difficult to make money making tools as it is as making games. So and then I guess the last thing to add to that is, if you're making tools, it's very easy for that to get away from you in terms of, if there is a success and you do have to be very responsive to the product that you've made, it'll require much more of your time in terms of upkeep than I think a game typically would. So I would just say it's very much a separate business model. It's a very separate kind of way of working to actually building a game itself once you kind of really dig into it. So I would encourage people who want to do that to really treat that as its own thing, that's distinct from games and requires a completely different skill set. I would say it can be rewarding and lucrative only if you can service a niche and then remain competitive and kind of at the top of that niche. There's a lot of people trying to do the same things and solve the same problems different ways, but 95% of those people are making zero money and spending a lot of time towards those products and getting nowhere, while the top, one or two versions of that thing are making all the revenue. So just be careful to kind of make something that you're passionate about and feel interested in and kind of committed to kind of building upon and servicing with a community, so that when you get caught up in that process, you're not hating every minute of it. Yeah, I think, to be more specific, like, it's easy to make a couple of $100 to a couple of $1,000 a month making tools for Unity and for Unreal, but that's not enough to support a team of people. That's probably not even enough to support one person's full salary, right? So I think that's the kind of space most people working in that area exist within, that they're making a little bit. It's a bit of a passive income, but then a lot of your time will be spent on support and kind of being reactive to the engine changes that mean that suddenly your tool is completely invalidated, or some shaders have been introduced, or a new shader pipeline has been introduced that means you have to kind of rebuild your tool again for the sixth time in a couple of years. I think you just need to be aware of like what your scales will be and try and make something that requires the least amount of upkeep possible. Yeah, all this to kind of say that I think if you got into the games to be making games, you shouldn't be making tools. You should just focus on games. So for us, tools and assets were a good and an interesting and important part of our early time as a studio. But what we've realized is now, working together, making games for so long, that really we should be focusing entirely on games, and we're going to actually wind down our tools aspect of the business, because if we were going to do that with all of our focus, it really would take all of our focus, and sure, we could be, we could probably be successful in that area, but it requires our entire focus to do that, and that's not what we want to do. So just I think as with anything, people just should take care to understand what they're doing and why. It's easy to kind of start down a path and then go a few years and realize, oh, I'm not happy doing this. This isn't what I wanted to be doing. Or maybe there's a better version of myself that I could be, experiencing if I was doing something different. So I would just encourage people to kind of reflect really frequently about the kinds of things that they're making and why, and does it make them feel good?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good topic to talk about. I'd love to talk to someone who's become really successful with like a specific tool, and hearing how their perspective has changed over time. I think with companies like Unreal and Unity as well, probably, but just developing so many tools internally, and that, working for the company itself, or Blender, for example, and the kind of like software that they're building to help provide for the games industry. And yeah, like there's a lot of different perspectives, and I'd be interested to know from someone who is full-time in that environment, if they are, thinking about games on a daily basis, or if their passion really is, systems and making tools more efficient and better, and that is really where their passion is, rather than to help provide assets to the next Lord of the Rings game. and
Yeah,
and that, that's actually where their passion lies.
that's a good point, actually. I think something we're seeing with Unreal and Unity specifically is kind of the big two engines is this diversification of focus. They're trying to appeal to film now just as much as games. And I think you can feel that in the way the engines are being developed and these pipelines are being put in place. And really, like, if your core business is games and you want it to be that way, and maybe they don't, I don't know the inner workings of those teams, but you should probably just focus on games. And I think the best thing you can do as an engine provider, which Unreal does a really good job of and is trying to do a better job of now, is actually have development teams internally that are using that tool and feeding back into the engine team and helping them understand the problems that game developers are trying to solve. Yeah, I kind of see a bit of a worrying trend away from like being very iterative and listening to what developers really need with some engines. And yeah, I think Unreal is a great example of an engine that's trying to do both games and film and other applications as well, AR, VR, whatever it is, but are still listening to this core audience of developers and trying to understand and keep on top of that process themselves.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time. Like, there's so much innovation happening. There's so many changing trends of consumers. Like, interactive media is becoming a lot more widely adopted. The whole definition of games and media and all that's blurring, and it's no doubt an interesting time for those engines. And yeah, there's a lot at stake, I think, for trying to satisfy too many people. And I guess it's just the nature of markets. There might be some solutions that some competitors that come up that are more tailored to that gamer's experience and have, that they have a niche that they cater to. But yeah, no, it's definitely interesting, and it's cool to know that you're curious about that as well.
Sure.
And it's definitely going to be an interesting time to see how things evolve. Things like virtual production is on the rise, and it's definitely impacting the film industry. And yeah, we'll see how all that evolves over time. But yeah, that's all the kind of time that we have, and I do really appreciate you coming on and me learning a bit more about yourself and your work and your lifestyle. It's been a pleasure hearing that, and learning some of the pros and cons of working night shifts and working for a remote company from New Zealand. I think that will be really insightful for a lot of people. If people are interested in keeping in touch with you and keeping in touch with the work and projects that you're doing, where can they get in touch with you?
You can always find me, I think, through jairmcbain.com is kind of the way that you can find all my channels. Twitter, I am Jair McBain, no space between the two. Pretty responsive there, although I try not to be on there as much as I can. But yeah, if you want to chat, you can definitely find me there, and yeah, we can have a conversation.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I do really appreciate your time and wish you the best. And hopefully you get your vaccine soon, and that you can head back to the UK and work with the Land and Sea guys. So I wish you the best on that journey as well.
Thanks very much. I'm really grateful for you taking the time to speak to me, and super grateful to be in New Zealand. I don't want to sound too negative about it. It's a great place to be, and we're very fortunate to have been relatively safe here the last few years. So yeah, thanks to the New Zealand game dev community as well for having me, and to you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure. If when I'm down in Wellington for NZGDC in August and you're around, I'll definitely message you to see if we can link up.
Sure, that sounds great. I'd love to catch up.
Yeah. All right. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the show. I hope you found it valuable and learned something new about game development and the future of games. If you did, I'd love to hear about it. Please message me on Twitter at 0toplay, and we can keep the conversation going there. If you want to hear the latest news of the show as soon as it's released, you can sign up to our newsletter or follow us on Twitter. For all of our episodes, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting service. All links can be found in the description below. Take care and see you all next week for a brand new episode.